Hello, welcome to another segment of The People Place. This is where we come to learn from business leaders. And I have found over the years that I learn the most from business leaders when they're sharing examples of what's worked, what hasn't worked, and really providing us with all kinds of tips. I'm Karen Kimsey Sword. Welcome to The People Place. Once again today, joining me is Marsha King. She plays a dual role. She's president of Polaris Leadership. She's a long time, over many years, a leadership consultant, an executive coach. She's done a lot of work in the whole leadership development and performance improvement area. I should say Dr. Marsha King, right? And you've got a lot of background and research in that. Marsha's also a well-respected faculty member at University of Buffalo, where she leads their leadership coaching certificate program. I've had the pleasure of actually participating in that program and learned so much through the program. So today, our topic is going to be, it's time to take off the mask. So welcome, Marsha, and I can't wait to talk about this. I've talked about this as both of our favorite topics.
Absolutely.
So what does that mean, take off the mask?
Well, first of all, let me tell you why I love this topic.
Okay.
Because no one is exempt from it. Everybody will face this and probably regularly face this throughout their life and throughout their career. So what is it? So the mask is a form of protection that we create. It's a guard that we put up. It's almost like a persona that we take on that enables us to fit into a team, to fit into a culture. It could be into an organization. It could also be in our personal lives. But there are times when we basically pretend to be somebody that we're not. And I don't mean completely. It's certain characteristics, certain personality traits that we pick up so that we fit in. Fitting in is an innate human need. And this is one of the things that we do to try to fit in.
So, I'm probably thinking, well, so what's wrong with that? Because I'm like, I've done that before, right? I've worn a mask before. I've done that to fit in over the years. I think we all have, right? You mentioned we're not exempt from it. So, what's so wrong with that? What's wrong with wearing a mask?
Okay, so trying to fit in is okay until you feel like who you are, what you believe in is being compromised, and that's when it becomes a heavy mask. Is that when we have to ignore our values, go against our belief system in order to prevent not fitting in, or to make sure that we do fit in. And so you're right, many times it's okay. I mean, there are certain social norms that we've created that we all need to adapt, be kind to people, for example. That's a big one, but it's other belief systems, other values that you hold. In corporations, we always hear things like, people are the most valuable assets we have. And we all generally agree with that. But what if you have to operate in a way that's not? What if you are terminating people regularly and that's not going well? Or it's being done in a way that you just can't get behind, right? That's when we're wearing a mask.
Any examples along the way? Because I know you spend a lot of your time coaching. Any examples of where the mask has been too heavy? I know you've given a couple now, but anything where you're like, oh no, this is when the mask becomes so heavy.
Yeah. A lot of times the mask becomes very heavy when you're working in an organization that has a mission that you're not aligned with.
So Marsha, what are the signs of when we're wearing a mask that's like a really heavy mask? I mean, what are some of the signs that we should be looking for? Yeah,
there's some telltale signs. So the first one is, do you find yourself regularly in disagreement with your leaders? I mean, that's a clear sign of misalignment, and that misalignment leads to us wearing a mask. Another sign would be, do you get a knot in your stomach on Sunday night, knowing that you have to go back to work on Monday? That means there's tension in there, and chances are there's tension because of misalignment with something. And then the third thing would be, does this organization leverage your strengths? And if they're not, then chances are you're wearing a mask. You're wearing a mask and pretending to be somebody else, pretending to have other strengths so that, that you can survive in the workplace.
Yeah, it's funny. You and I've talked about this because I've had a situation or two over my career where I wore a heavy mask, but it's almost like I wasn't aware of it until then. I started feeling uneasy in meetings. I felt like I wasn't growing. I felt like I wasn't me in meetings. I wasn't speaking up. I wasn't, and I felt like I wasn't as accepted, if you will. And then you become, and then you can feel it, like you can feel it in your gut. And then part of mine was that I became ill. I kept getting sick. And so and so many times we're just running so fast. We don't even recognize we have the heavy mask. We don't understand. We don't stop until so many times it gets to be, I don't want to say too late, but until you start seeing implications. And then it's like, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And I think you make a really good point. Sometimes we wear this mask so long that we start believing it. We start believing that is who we are. And guess what? What happens is what you just mentioned. You start getting sick or you start failing in some way. It will show up somewhere in maybe your personal life. But yeah, we often go around wearing this mask and we start to believe the mask. We think that's, this is who I am. Right. And it's not.
So what do we do? Because it is scary. You start thinking about, okay, I'm wearing this really heavy mask. What are some practical tips, for someone that's like, okay, you know what, you're speaking to me here, and I want to figure out, how do I take this heavy mask off? Well, what do I do? Because then we're exposing ourselves, right? So what are some ideas you have?
It's dangerous, right? And it's uncomfortable. We have to be vulnerable. But the number one thing is to acknowledge you're wearing it. I mean, again, like you said, sometimes you go along for so long that you don't even realize it's on there. So acknowledge it, number one. Number two, figure out who you really are. What is authenticity to you? Because again, it gets muddled when we are wearing a mask. We get confused when we're wearing this mask. And so gain some clarity for yourself on, what do I believe in? What do I stand for? What are my values? And then you can ask yourself, am I feeling tension in those areas? And I promise you that you probably are. Then the third thing you want to do is change your situation. So you've got to change your situation so that you will be in a situation that enables you to use your strengths, to be able to honor your values, to be able to act within your belief system. And that there's a continuum. I mean, it could be minor tweaks to your job, minor tweaks to your relationships. It can be major too, like completely quitting altogether. What are your thoughts about that? I know you've experienced this.
I have. Now, in my situation, I had to leave the organization because it was so not aligned with my values and actually with my gifts, because my strengths weren't being leveraged. And I knew that. And so I had to leave. But I think, other people that I've worked with, they're like, no, I can tweak a little bit and I'm fine. I will share with you one of the things that really worked well for me, and that works well, I know, for leaders that I worked with, is we talk about, you and I've talked about this. It's like, we talk about, how do you want to show up? Like, how do you want to show up? And we always talk about, show up words. And so part of when you talked about acknowledge and figuring out, kind of how you want to show up is almost having 3 or 4 words where you're like, on a good day, every day. And every day, it's like, every day, how do I want to show up? What are some words? Because even that tweak can help, right? On how do I just get focused on being more intentional on that? And how do I not get in my own way? Because many times, yes, it's the organization, but many times it also could be us getting in our own way. And a lot of, I want to call it like our baggage.
Absolutely. Some of it's self-imposed. A lot of it is self-imposed. And so going through an exercise where you really figure out, who are you really? And who do you want to be? And then aligning the world around you to be supportive of that. But you said something I definitely want to bring up. This is interesting. A lot of this is in our language, right? The words that we use become the blueprint for our lives. And so many of us will say things like, my boss just doesn't support me. My boss doesn't like me, right? And that creates a mask when it probably isn't true. So the boss may not give you what you think you need, like, regular communication. It doesn't mean they don't like you. But we've put this mask on in a self-imposed way because of that. So I'm glad you brought that up. An example, let me give you a real quick example. So I was coaching a leader of a huge health system who was responsible for merging these health systems. There was an acquisition and her org was acquired. And she kept saying over and over to me, the acquiring organization, they're just not there. They're just not there. They just don't respect me. They don't believe, what I have to offer. And I said, let's change your language on that. And all I want you to do is add the word yet at the end of your sentences. They're just not there yet. That completely gave her the permission to take off the mask and start using her strengths and recognizing that when her strengths were rejected, it's only because they're not there yet, but they will be. So anyway, one small example.
I think that's great. I think, you brought up a good point, because there are a lot of things that are in our minds.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
And
true.
and it's like, then I'm thinking, well, where did this start? Where did this whole mask wearing start, or what,
Yeah.
where did it come from?
Yes. Okay. So I'm glad we've created this distinction. There are masks that we put on because of the way we're seeing our environment. There are masks put on because of the environment that we're in. And so I think we need to decide or filter through those and say, is this self-imposed, or is this really something in my culture that I'm working in that is forcing me to wear a mask? Okay. So what you and I are talking about is that second piece. Where do we learn this? I think there's two significant, we probably learn it from a million different places, but there's two significant places. One is just growing up. We are in a world and a country in a, state, a city, whatever, that has a certain set of norms that we need to stick by. Some of those may not be aligned with us. The other place that we get it is when we start working for an organization, there are certain things that they expect. There's a mold that they want. The moment you feel like you have to fit into a mold, you've just put on a mask. The moment you feel like your belief system is being compromised because of the culture you're in, you just put on the mask. So we learn it from a lot of places, but it's mostly culture and, just life in general.
Right. So as leaders, many of us listening today, we're leaders.
Yeah.
We have teams of people, right? So we can talk about our mask, what we do. What are some things that as leaders that we can help our teams, our people, not wear such heavy masks and help
Exactly.
them, more who
And
they
I'll tell you, hopefully everybody's had a chance to work with a leader like this, but the very best leaders create a culture where the trust is high and they are creating an environment of psychological safety. So psychological safety means that you can be your authentic self without repercussions. If I were a leader, I would seek out opportunities to reward people in a public way who have expressed themselves, been authentic, brought up the unpopular, said something that was unpopular, even if the leader disagreed with it. Just doing that in a public setting and genuinely acknowledging and accepting differing opinions creates a wonderful, psychologically safe culture where trust can thrive.
So a lot of it's how they respond and how how they respond to these situations.
Yeah,
Right.
exactly.
And then also being proactive as well. I like that. I like that.
And it's easy. It's when someone asks a question, for example, in a public setting, even if you disagree with the question being asked, start by saying, well, I think that's a great question. I don't know if you like my answer, but I'm appreciative that you asked it.
Yeah.
You see how that works?
It.
Yeah.
Okay. So also another thing that I talk with leaders about, it's also team dynamics.
Yeah.
So then how do you, as a leader, help people remove their masks. They've got the team. So it could be, oh, yes, as a leader, I'm responding well. But then how do you, do you know what I mean? How do you get people responding to each other? Is there anything you can do there? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Because here's the reality of the matter. Anything that we can mess up, we do, right?
Yeah.
So authenticity is, I think of it in two ways. Being authentic should elevate people. It should help people. It should create, more open-mindedness or something that's going to help the organization, the mission, the goals, and the people involved, right? Sometimes people use authenticity as a weapon, and it can be toxic to people. When a leader recognizes that, they got to shut it down immediately, shut it down. So, a very small example of that would be some sarcasm. Sarcasm is basically funny because it's rooted in truth, but the truth, unfortunately, is negative truth.
Right.
So and it could be damaging to people, to the organization. The moment a leader sees somebody being toxic in some kind of way, particularly through being authentic, shut it down. And sometimes we hear people say, I am who I am. I call it as I see it. Well, what if the way you're calling it is diminishing to the people around you? What if it's diminishing to the culture and the organization? When a leader sees that, they need to shut it down.
Yeah. So it's almost like they're hiding behind all this. Yeah. I can do this because I've been this way and this helps do whatever. Like they're making excuses for it. So you're saying as a leader, talk with that person, get them, get them to see that and whatever is way to, shut it down, get it shut down, because then it causes, you're going to continue to have a culture of people wearing heavy masks.
Exactly. And shutting it down doesn't necessarily mean go to them and say you're out or knock it off. It could be helping them to reframe whatever it is that they're being toxic about. We can reframe anything that is aligned with us, helps us to be authentic, and also helps people. And that's the sweet spot. As a leadership coach, I spend a ton of time doing that. How can I help leaders to be authentic, be able to sleep at night, and still work within an organization? I mean, we can do it. It's not necessarily the easiest thing to do, but we can do it.
Absolutely. Well, good. Well, thank you so much. Fun talking about this topic, and more topics to come, and appreciate your time today. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thanks, Karen. I love this. Take care.
Thanks.